My deadbeat father got the surprise of his life when he learned out this family secret. Why do things that start out sweet end up sour? My mother, my brother, and I are currently at our grandparents' house where my father's being reprimanded by them for maltreating Mom. Things were not always like this between them, see. As a matter of fact, my mother would always tell my brother and I, after she must have been beaten up by Dad, that there was a time he was head over heels in love with her. And you wonder why she would spend time talking to her little children about the issue that sensitive, huh? Just know that it's because she had no other person. She was in fact an orphan. Dad and Mom had met when Mom came looking for a job at the family firm. Dad's family is into oil and the gas business, and they have various gas plants scattered through the city. Dad picked interest in Mom that very first day that he set his eyes on her, well, because of her beauty. A beauty that was gradually fading because of the constant beatings which he usually gave her. My grandparents had initially taken the matter lightly by occasionally calling their son to order and all, but from the way Grandpa's voice was raised, it was clear that he meant business this time around. And this is because my mother's life was almost snuffed out by my dad. While she was running from him during the last beating session, she tripped and fell, thereby fracturing her hip. This has now permanently affected her movement for life. Granddad warned my father that it was the last time that such a fraction should occur, otherwise he would personally deal with him as though he was not his son. Granddad noted that the business was currently facing crisis as competition was growing, and it meant less revenue, and so he would rather spend time worrying over productive ways just to grow the business, rather than waste time playing judge between my parents. Unlike my father, Grandpa had enough sense to know that Mom could sue his son and it would affect the family business greatly. Grandpa compensated my mother by deciding to take care of her and I, and my brother's schooling. This meant that my mother did not really have to work as she did before. What's up, guys? Mr. Reddito here. So this is a very unique story. The OP of the story wrote it in a diary format. There's about 7 or 8 pieces to it, so let's go ahead and jump into the next section. I hope you guys are having a great day. Here is section number 2. Hey, it's been a few months since my granddad reprimanded my father, and I could say that my father has actually straightened out. We've not seen him argue with Mom, much less lay a finger on her ever since. As a matter of fact, he acted nice towards my mom and us. The surprising part of the whole thing is that he began frequenting the firm to help around, something he rarely ever did. Everyone was glad that my father was now the best version he'd ever been. Grandfather threw a party last night to celebrate the company's win and honor my father for making it all possible. It was really shocking to hear that Granddad hosted a party to honor his son, who has never really been too involved in the family business except until recently. But I guess that my dad was deserving of the party. My dad had apparently come up with the various innovations and ideas that could lead to the expansion of our firm, and I guess you could say save the day. One of the such was the establishment of several gas plants outside of the city, in the countryside, where local folks could easily access the product. This would save the cost and risk of transporting gas from city to countryside, and would also provide profitables along the run. There were occasions in times past where there was accidents during the conveyance of our product to the countryside, and those kinds of accidents usually involved the loss of life. The company would then have to spend millions in settling for the families, so they weren't dragged to court. My father's idea was really going to save the day. My dad took it upon himself to find a good spot where the major gas plants would be suited, and there was little competition. My grandfather welcomed the idea with open hands, so much in fact he gave the go-ahead to start the project ASAP. A project which my father was going to manage and supervise. The project was going to cost millions of dollars, though it would really just initiate to slow down the activities of the company. It would yield a massive turnaround in the future. The party which was held was more like a groundbreaking party. My dad showed up with Irene, the consultant who hired to work alongside him. I don't know if consults have a dress code or not. I can't really say. But this Irene consultant looked more like a hooker than she did a contractor. Well, what do I know? So long as she was going to get the job done right, then I have no reason to complain. My grandfather paraded my dad that day as his only son and heir. I could see the pride in his face when he told everyone that his son, which virtually everyone knew to be a never-do-well, was actually the brain behind the giant step which the company's about to leap into. The night ended with my father giving a speech of thanks to my granddad for trusting him, and equally pledging his allegiance to forever seek the good of the company. I'm glad my father's indeed stepping up to responsibilities. Post number 3. Hey, it's been 2 months since I wrote in this thing. I last posted, and it's because there's been quite a series of drama that's occurred in the family that I have no time to really write about. My father's currently nowhere to be seen, and though an official police request had been lodged, we cannot really say if he was kidnapped or he just ran away. It's most likely that he ran away from the house after the supposed project was kick-started. My granddad soon got a call one afternoon that my father had attempted taking his own life. As expected, there was panic everywhere. My grandfather sent some people to go and get him, and he was brought home sobbing like a child while saying that he was better off dead. My father's body was covered in blood. He tried to cut his wrist open so that he could just go that way. Upon inquiry, it turned out that he had scammed by the contractor, which was supposed to handle the whole project. As soon as the total amount of the entire project was paid in full to the contractor's account, my father found it difficult reaching out to her. Her mobile phone number was no longer going through, disconnected. And when my father visited the place where she said she lived, he was told that she moved out a while ago, and that's when it dawned on him that he had been gotten. Millions of dollars were thrown down into the drain just like that. Irene, the contractor, which looked like a hooker to me, was actually a scam artist all along. The implication of the loss was massive. The story had actually made headlines the next day, and the company that had made the boast of taking such giant steps to success had begun sinking like a ship. Granddad was more broken than everyone else. The company had parted with over 50% of its capital just to fund my father's expansion idea. Well, it turned out to be a failure. Such a loss would take the company years of consistent profit to recover, and with the level of competition going on, the likelihood was not much. Grandpa, surprisingly, did not let the whole thing weigh him down. Even though mockers and competitors took good advantage of the situation, he even encouraged Dad to not be hard on himself. I cannot tell if Dad took the advice or not, but it's been 3 weeks since we last saw or heard from him. What's up, guys? Mr. Reddito. So this next update is about to take a wild change. OP is going ahead and skipping 15 years ahead in the timeline. With the update starting out, 15 long years have passed since my last update. Well, I'm now a big girl who's getting ready for marriage. After the financial setback with the company had suffered and failure to find my father, my grandfather suffered a stroke that caused him to remain on a wheelchair, which the doctors said that he was going to use for the rest of his life. My grandmother had to support him, and this affected everybody, especially those who were beneficiaries of my father's wealth. Yeah, my granddad was a philanthropist. My mother had to resume working so as to support my younger brother, and I in schooling. She felt it insensitive to still let my grandfather shoulder all the financial responsibilities, which our schooling demanded just alone. Seeing that firm was not doing so well, and Granddad was not as strong as he ever was, I can call my mother my own superhero, as she was having issues with her joints, still took the pain of working just to make sure I finished college in flying colors. This is not to say that I've never had distractions, au contraire. I was deceived in my early days in college by a guy who I fell in love with. I never knew he was just after sleeping with me. 2 months after, well, he did sleep with me, I discovered that I was pregnant. I was shocked when the guy who said he loved me more than life suddenly warned me to stay far, far away from him. I was not willing to bear the shame, and neither was I going to forgive myself if Mother collapsed out of a heartbreak because of an unwanted pregnancy. So I went the only option which was at my disposal, abortion. After the abortion, though, I decided that I was going to focus on my studies, as guys were just simply not worth it. I came out of college a chemical engineer, and I immediately started seeking for jobs. I did not want to ask my grandfather if it were possible to get one in the family company, as most of the staff were laid off for the years. My search for a job landed me in the premise of our rival in the oil business. I submitted my application, and while I was awaiting their response, my granddad decided to place me in the managerial position of the firm, as he was not as strong to run the affairs. A few weeks after I was running the family business, the rival company reached out to me. They were apparently pleased with my academic qualifications and wanted me to work for them. I turned them down as I've already gotten a job, but Ferdinand, the son of the CEO, picked an interest in me and asked me out. We began dating. Though I did not have much expectation from that relationship, Ferdinand proposed to me a few weeks after we met. And though every lady in my shoes would have said yes right away, I told him no. My main reason for declining was not really because his father's company was a rival of mine, but because I wasn't really sure if he meant to spend the rest of the life with me or not. After pressing me, I decided to put him to the test. I called him 2 weeks after the first time we were together, and I told him I was pregnant. It was a lie, but I needed to see his reaction and how ready he was to shoulder responsibilities. Ferdinand was glad and wanted meeting with my people to facilitate a wedding ASAP. I knew that he was the man for me. I accepted his marriage proposal after telling him the pregnancy was feigned. I'd introduced him to my mother and brother, and they both loved him. But I was skeptical to introduce him to Granddad because he was the son of his business rival. All the same, I knew there was no way I could get married without getting my granddad involved, so I finally took Ferdinand to meet with him. To my surprise, though, Grandfather welcomed him as though the rival business never existed. We would be getting married next month, and the next time I write in this thing will be my status as a single lady would have been updated to a married woman. Next chapter. Well, it's official, I am Miss. I got married last week, and I'm currently preparing to go on a honeymoon with my husband, much to the displeasure of my grandparents. Yeah, you heard that right. My grandfather in particular is against me going for the honeymoon, and it's not because he wants me to go work or he's against my marriage. Oh no, the contraire, just like I noted. He'd welcome my husband Ferdinand with open arms, even though he was the son of our biggest competitor. Granddad even covered the expenses of the wedding as a show of good gesture. The reason my granddad wanted me to postpone my honeymoon was because of my father. Yeah, my father came back, and he made his little grand entrance. He gate-crashed my wedding. Things were going on really well on my wedding day. We'd been joined as husband and wife, and were simply having the reception party when Dad waltzed in. It's been 15 years since we last saw him, but there was really no much difference. He was clean-shaven, and it didn't look like he was suffering. I couldn't help myself, but I exclaimed, "Dad?" And that got the attention of folks shifted to my father. The wedding party ended rather quickly because my dad had come back to life. My grandparents broke down in tears as they saw my father for the first time in years. Well, my mother, my brother, and I remained unmoved. We were rather seeking answers as to why he disappeared out of our lives all these years ago. My father acknowledged that he was not kidnapped, or whatever the story was. He said that the shame of having the family's business in jeopardy was the reason he left. The trio of my mother, brother, and I were mad. How could he abandon us for over a decade for such a stupid reason? If shame had made him ghost his wife and kids, then why was he returning now when the company's still suffering from his mistake? The three of us made it clear that we did not want him in our lives. As a matter of fact, we no longer needed him for anything. My grandparents, on the other hand, were just too excited and over the moon to see their son. They readily forgot besides the fact that the family business has yet to recover from the financial loss because of father. Granddad, who suffered a stroke as a result of his disappearance, was on a wheelchair where he would remain the rest of his days. Grandfather began pushing to make us to become one big family again, but this was simply not going to happen. He fixed a family gathering that was to take place in a week's time, and demanded that we were all present. The purpose of the gathering was for peace. The gathering meant that my honeymoon was going to be postponed. Well, I simply refused. My father's not worth it. For the first time in my life, I'm going to disappoint and disobey my granddad. I told my granddad of my unwillingness to stay back, but he threatened that anyone who was not around for the peacemaking would simply be sending a message that he or she was not part of the family. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would I go to there, or should I just go to my own honeymoon? Post number 6. It's been about 7 months since I jotted in this thing, and we're all preparing to read my grandfather's will, which I guess contained error on his part, but you may not understand, except I'll start from where I left off. After Granddad had demanded that everyone be present for the family peace gathering, my husband Ferdinand talked to me in the back. He convinced me I should stay back. The meeting was basically Granddad trying to make everything dance to his tune through emotional blackmail. He claimed that he was not getting younger and would not want to die knowing that his family was not at peace with each other. Well, neither my mom, brother, or I argued with him because it was clear that he'd been so taken over by the return of his son that I believe it even affected his sound judgment. My granddad, after, quote, making peace, removed me from the managerial position and placed my father there. Now, I don't really have a problem with my father taking the seat of leadership because I know for a fact that it was supposed to be his under normal circumstances. Yeah, normal circumstances. This was not normal. My father had no knowledge of how to run the company. He'd been gone for over 15 years, and only God knows what he's been doing throughout that time. But I'm certain that it had nothing to do with managing a firm. I went to share my thoughts with Granddad, but he rather rebuked me for trying to usurp my very own father's position. But that was far from the truth. The family business under my leadership and management was beginning to take a little shape. But as soon as my father took over the reins of leadership, you could tell the difference. Everything just started going amiss. I fell out with my father one of the days when I could no longer stomach his repulsive attitude. Virtually everyone knew my father was just messing things up, but nobody had the guts to challenge him. The auditors had brought in the monthly report on the company's profit, loss, and expenditure, and it was clear that there was an abuse of funds happening. Yep. The data did not rhyme well at all. There was loopholes here and there, loopholes that meant that some funds are unaccounted for. I was supposed to be the chief operating officer, and even though my father was the manager, he had to run certain things by me. But he did not. He acted just so because he knew that I was going to question certain things. After going through the report, I discovered that over $150,000 were not accounted for. I walked up to him. His secretary was not at the door to inform him of my presence, so I proceeded into the office without prior announcement. I was shocked to find out he was making out with his secretary. My father seriously had no shame. He was a dog. He always desired whatever was in skirts. They both separated as the secretary scrambled on the floor to pick her clothing up. Although I could not hide the look of disgust on my face, I ignored what I'd seen and proceeded to ask my father about the discovery I've made with the monthly report. He refused giving me an answer relating the question that I asked. He rather reminded me that he was the acting manager of the family business and would not need the validation of his daughter, who was still his staff member, before making any moves that he saw befitting for the company. He actually threatened to fire me if I ever walked into his office like that again, or if I ever stood up to his questions or his actions. I left my father's office that day feeling angry than I had come. It really hurt so much to just stand by and watch everything been torn apart by Dad. But there was nothing that I could do, as I did not have the support of my grandfather. I had tried making him see reason, but he felt I was jealous and envious of my dad, who, according to him, needed more time to settle in. Well, the more time went by, the more losses were incurred. I only knew time was going to prove me right. And it did. A few weeks later, my family business began registering decline in sales and loss of clients. The success rate, which had not been high for the past 15 years, was beginning to drop lower and lower. To make matters worse, my father reverted back to his lifestyle of debauchery. It began to dawn on everyone that my granddad had made a huge mistake. My grandmother passed on around this time, and though she died of natural causes, her passing still affected Dad. She was buried quietly, and my mother began taking care of my grandfather while my father ran the company down the drain as he saw fit. A few weeks later, my granddad passed on as well, and as you should expect, my father began lording over everything. We're preparing to read his will, but my mother's getting ready to leave the house, because we all know that my father's going to be the successor of the family business and property, and he doesn't mean well for my mom and his children. I, for one, have resigned from the firm and joined my husband's at his father's company because I know that my father, who sees me as a stumbling block, would waste no time in getting me fired once Granddad's will was read. Confirming his inheritance, I would rather leave with my honor intact than give my father the privilege and satisfaction of firing me. Update number 7. I've been working in my father-in-law's firm for the past 2 months, and I'm already planning on resigning to go back, take the reins of leadership of my late grandfather's firm, and fire my dad. It sure feels good saying that. My granddad was laid to rest, and my father made a show of himself as heir during the burial ceremony. He gathered the big and mighty, and what was supposed to be a funeral ceremony could easily be mistaken for a celebration party meant to announce my dad's coronation. Though my mother did her best to hide her pain, I knew that she was hurt seeing my father surround himself with younger girls, close to my age. Well, I never really expected him to parade an older lady who was limping as his wife. The burial ceremony soon ended, and we all gathered at the family house, where father was housing his lover to hear the will being read. I was basically there out of respect to Granddad. I'd arranged for my mother to temporarily move in with my husband and I till we found her a suitable house. Anyways, I'm glad that I was present to watch the whole drama unfold. I could not forget the look on my father's face when the lawyer pronounced that the family house, which he lived with his lover, was being given to my mom. He was clearly not happy, but he managed to keep his calm. He could not, though, keep his calm for long, as the next news drove him mad. The lawyer announced that both the firm and the remaining properties owned by my family was now co-owned by my younger brother and I. I was to take charge of the company with immediate effect, and my brother was to join me once he was done with schooling.
"No, it can't be. It's a lie. Something's not right,"
was all my father, who was visibly enraged, could be able to say, choking the lawyer by the throat. There was commotion everywhere as people around made to separate the lawyer from my father's grip. There was no such thing as foul play or error. My grandfather had righted his wrong shortly before he died. He knew that his son would mess the business up and drain it, and he called his lawyer to alter the will in favor of mother, brother, and I. I believe that it's a worthy compensation for all the beatings and negligence which we suffered over the years. My mother gave my father 3 months to get his belongings and move out of the house, or risk being thrown out and humiliated, which I think he did deserve anyways. Besides, 3 months by my estimation is too long to let him stay on in the house. I, on the other hand, have told my father never to show his face anywhere near the company for the rest of his miserable life. What's up, guys? Mr. Reddito here. So that actually took a huge change. I didn't see that coming in the inheritance. There was one final entry into the diary. It's titled Update number 7. Well, it's been 3 months gone by since my mother asked my father to leave, but he didn't just leave the house, he was thrown in jail. Immediately after grandfather read his will, I took over the company and set up a security network around the firm to stop my dad from gaining access. As for the house where he was staying, he refused leaving, in peace with the stupid claim that he was the first and only son of his father, and there's no way his father could have left him empty-handed. My mother ignored him while patiently waiting for the 3 months' duration to be over so she could throw him out, but she decided to change her mind within the second month after my father took the case to court. My father wanted countering the will with my grandfather. Thankfully, his case did not hold any ground in court as it was quickly dismissed. As soon as my father lost in court, my mother involved the police, who came to eject my father straight out of the building. It was while they were trying to force him out that a lady showed up with 2 children. I could swear that the lady looked familiar, and while I was busy trying to recollect where I've seen her, my mother shouted her name in surprise. It was Irene, the contractor who stole all the money. The cops quickly seized her, as she had been wanted for over 15 years. My dad was reluctant to leave the building, suddenly attempted to run, and this prompted the cops to hold him back. Upon interrogation, it was discovered that Irene was my father's lover. He'd convinced her to act as a contractor so they could both siphon a huge amount of money from grandfather and simply run away. This was because he wanted just to get away from my mom, whom my granddad had warned him he never to abuse again. My father and his lover agreed that she would go into hiding while he faked a suicide attempt just to get any form of suspicion off his back. The whole time when he cried and beat himself up was just an act that had worked swimmingly. He left the house to go and join his lover Irene, where she had been hiding all this while. It was while they were together that she had 2 children from him. As time went by, he knew that my grandfather was ill and had placed me in a managerial position, so he came back just to ensure he gets inheritance.
He was supposed to secretly take care of Irene and her 2 kids,
but ever since he left her, she had not heard from him once.
It was during the flamboyant burial ceremony of grandfather
that was streamed across the city that she suspected my father was about playing her, as he had played us, and that was why she showed up with the kids. The revelation was a shocking one. I'm pretty sure that my grandfather would have given anything to return from the dead just to take his son back with him. The police whisked them both away swiftly, but my mother, my brother, and I decided that we're going to press charges. The company which our grandfather had left behind was suffering all because of my father's selfishness. The painful part was that there was no money to recover. My father and his lover owned no property anywhere. They just squandered the money. So we charged them for fraud, and we didn't need much evidence as we had the confession of Irene, my father's lover. My father was sentenced to life in prison, while Irene, his lover, had a reduced sentence to 50 years without parole. And this was because she confessed the crime. When it dawned on my father that he was never going to be a free man again, he began crying and begging, and this time I believe the tears were real. All the same, it did not move anybody. He deserved what he got. As for his kids, which happens to be my step-siblings, my mother took them under her wing. She would nurture them to grow into someone way better than their parents would have. The part of my father and his stupidity was dealt with, but there were still the after-effects of my father's actions that needed to swiftly be handled. The company was suffering. There was basically little or no financial power to sustain it. I thought long and hard, and my husband thankfully suggested a solution. He proposed it. A merger. A merger between his father's company and ours. The 2 companies merging as one, working side and side. It was the only logical solution that could save us. That way, there could be enough financial power and clientele, and we would surely grow, taking over the entire marketplace. I met with my father-in-law to discuss it, and though he welcomed the idea, he clearly stated that he was going to own 60% of the shares, while I and my brother would both own 20% each. After much deliberation, I accepted those terms. It was better than watching the whole business crash and burn, which my grandfather built with his bare hands. So far, the merger was proved the best decision. We're doing well while my father and his lover are both rotting in a jail cell. Well, good riddance.
Bad rubbish.
So this was such an intense story. It had me questioning if this story could even be real. I know, some people in this crazy world do stuff way worse than what we've heard in this story, but I don't know. Something about it was just throwing red flags like, can this be real? I can't believe it, but at least those 2 crooked criminals are behind bars. Guys, let's talk about this in the comment section. Do you think this story was rubbish? Or do you think that it could have possibly happened? Drop your comments down below. Let's talk about it. That's all the content for today. I hope you did enjoy that story. Guys, if you're not subscribed to the channel, just understand one thing. It's the best way to support me, and it helps out so much. Thank you again for all your support, guys, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a great day.